The phone rang at 2 a.m., and I knew it was trouble. Nobody calls a rancher in the dead of night to chat about the weather. By the time I heard Karen's voice shrieking through the receiver, accusing me of stealing her land, I was already halfway to laughing or crying, maybe both. My name's Ethan Caldwell, and I've been running the Double Bar Ranch in Montana for a decade, ever since my dad passed and left me 500 acres of dirt, dreams, and debt. It's not glamorous. Think busted fences, ornery cattle, and a bank account that's more prayer than profit. But it's mine, and I'd fight tooth and nail to keep it. Karen Whitaker, my new neighbor, didn't see it that way. She'd moved in 6 months ago, a city transplant with a perm and a vendetta, convinced my fence line was creeping onto her property like some sneaky land grab. Never mind that my family's been here since the 1800s, or that her evidence was a crumpled surveyor's map from eBay. To Karen, I was the enemy, and she was ready to wage war. It started small petty complaints about my cows mooing too loud, or how my tractor kicked up dust that ruined her yoga vibe. I tried to be neighborly, offering her coffee, even fixing her mailbox after a storm. But Karen wasn't the compromising type. She'd stand at the property line, arms crossed, glaring like she was auditioning for a villain role in a western. Then came the wildflowers. My ranch is dotted with Karen flowers, those delicate white blooms that look like lace against the prairie. They're native, tough as hell, and my dad used to say they were the soul of the land. Karen. She called them weeds and demanded I rip them out because they were invading her side. I told her no, politely, then not so politely. That's when she started plotting. By July, Karen had escalated from complaints to sabotage. I'd find my gates left open, cattle wandering onto her land. She'd call the county, claiming I was running an illegal operation. I'd explain to the inspectors patiently, at first that my permits were in order, my fences legal. But Karen had a knack for drama, and she knew how to work a system. She'd film my cows on her phone, narrating like she was in a true crime documentary. This is the chaos I endure daily. I'd watch her from my porch, shaking my head, wondering how someone could have so much time and so little sense. The breaking point came on a blistering August afternoon. I was in the barn, mending a harness, when I heard tires crunching gravel. Karen's SUV screeched to a stop, and she stormed out, red-faced, waving her phone like a weapon. "You've gone too far, Ethan," she screamed. I stepped outside, wiping sweat from my brow, and saw her pointing at a patch of Karen flowers near the fence. "Those weeds are on my property, and I'm done asking nicely." I laughed. Can't help it. The idea of her losing sleep over flowers was absurd. But Karen didn't laugh. She dialed 911 right there, her voice shrill as she reported me for trespassing and vandalism. I stood there, stunned, as she spun a tale about me destroying her land with my toxic plants. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that my uncle, Sheriff Tom Caldwell, was the one who'd take her call. Tom's been the law in this county for 20 years, a no-nonsense man who knows every inch of this valley, including the fact that my fence line hasn't moved since my great-granddad hammered the first post. When Tom's cruiser rolled up an hour later, Karen's smirk was brighter than the noon sun. She thought she'd won. She thought wrong. Tom stepped out, his boots kicking up dust, and gave me a look that said, "What mess have you gotten into now?" Karen launched into her tirade, gesturing wildly at the flowers, claiming they were evidence of my crimes. Tom listened, stone-faced, then walked over to the fence line. He bent down, plucked a Karen flower, and held it up. "This what you're fussing about?" he asked. Karen nodded, triumphant. Tom turned to me, his eyes twinkling with that sly humor he's famous for. "Ethan, you been planting these on purpose to rile her up?" I shook my head, biting back a grin. Tom sighed, then looked at Karen. "Ma'am, these flowers are native. They grow where they please. Ethan's not breaking any laws." Karen's face went from smug to scarlet. "That's impossible," she snapped. "He's been moving the fence. I have proof." She thrust her phone at Tom, showing blurry photos of stakes and string she'd set up herself. Tom didn't even glance at the screen. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, voice low and final, "I've known this land since I was a boy. The Caldwell fence is where it's always been. You're wasting my time and the county's." Karen sputtered, but Tom wasn't done. "And next time you call 911 over flowers, you might find yourself with a fine for misuse of emergency services." I thought that'd be the end of it. Karen stormed off, and I figured she'd lick her wounds and move on. But I underestimated her. Hell hath no fury like a Karen scorned, and she was about to prove it. Over the next week, strange things started happening. My water pump broke sabotaged, with sugar syrup gumming up the works. My best horse, Daisy, got loose, and I found her grazing on Karen's land, with a cut rope dangling from her halter. Then came the anonymous complaints to the State Agriculture Board, accusing me of environmental violations. Each time, I'd clear my name, but the stress was piling up. My ranch hands were jittery, my savings were dwindling, and I was starting to wonder if Karen would burn my whole life down over a patch of flowers. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, the air thick with the threat of a storm. I was checking the barn when I saw headlights slicing through the dark. Karen's SUV, parked at the edge of my property. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out, my gut telling me something was wrong. As I got closer, I saw her silhouette near the fence, hunched over, pouring something from a canister. Gasoline. The smell hit me like a punch, and I realized she was dousing the Karen flowers, the ones she hated so much. She struck a match, and before I could shout, a line of flame roared to life, licking at the dry grass. "Karen, stop!" I yelled, running toward her. She spun around, eyes wild, the matchbox still in her hand. "You brought this on yourself," she screamed. "You and your damn flowers." The fire was spreading fast, too fast, creeping toward my pasture where my cattle were grazing. I grabbed a shovel from the fence post, trying to beat back the flames, but it was no use. The wind was against me, and the fire was hungry. I called 911 myself this time, praying Tom was still on duty. Karen just stood there, watching the blaze like she'd finally won. When Tom's cruiser arrived, lights flashing, the fire had reached the edge of my pasture. The volunteer fire crew wasn't far behind, but the damage was done. Acres of my land scorched, a dozen cattle spooked and scattered. Tom took one look at Karen, still clutching her canister, and his face hardened. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "you're under arrest for arson." She tried to argue, claiming it was her land, her right, but Tom wasn't having it. He cuffed her right there, her protests echoing into the night as the fire crew fought to save what was left of my ranch. As Tom led Karen to his cruiser, her voice cut through the crackle of the dying fire like a banshee's wail. "This is a setup," she shrieked, twisting in his grip. "Ethan framed me. He's been out to ruin me since I moved here." I stood there, shovel still in hand, watching the flames eat away at my pasture. The smell of charred grass and gasoline clung to the air, and my chest felt like it was caving in. I'd spent years pouring my soul into this ranch, and now it was burning because of a woman who couldn't stand a few flowers. Tom shot me a glance, half pity, half warning to keep my cool, and shoved Karen into the back of his cruiser. The fire crew was doing what they could, but the damage was already catastrophic. I could see it in their faces. This wasn't just a fire. It was a reckoning. By dawn, the flames were out, leaving a blackened scar across my land. The fire chief, a grizzled guy named Hank who'd known my dad, clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You're lucky it didn't reach the barn, Ethan," he said. "Could have lost everything." I nodded, but lucky felt like a cruel joke. I'd lost half my grazing land, and the cattle that hadn't bolted were spooked beyond reason. My ranch hands, loyal as they were, looked rattled, whispering among themselves about whether the double bar could recover. I didn't have an answer for them. All I had was a smoldering rage and a bone-deep exhaustion that made my boots feel like lead. Word of Karen's arrest spread faster than the fire itself. By noon, neighbors were showing up with casseroles and condolences, their pickup trucks lining my driveway. This was Montana folks' rally when one of their own takes a hit. But they also brought gossip, and the stories about Karen were wilder than a rodeo bull. Some said she'd been fired from her city job for harassing coworkers, others swore she tried to sue her last neighborhood over a barking dog. I didn't care about her past. I just wanted her gone. But when Tom called me that afternoon, his voice heavy, I knew it wasn't that simple. "Ethan, we've got a problem," he said. I was in my kitchen, nursing a coffee that tasted like ash. "Karen's claiming you provoked her, says you've been harassing her for months, moving fences, poisoning her water, the works. She's got a lawyer, some slick guy from out of town, and they're pushing for a deal." I nearly choked. A deal? "She set my land on fire, Tom." He sighed, and I could picture him rubbing his temples, the way he did when the world got too stupid. "I know, kid. But her lawyer's spinning a story, and she's got enough money to make it loud. You need to lawyer up too." I hung up, my hands shaking. The idea of fighting Karen in court felt like stepping into a snake pit. I didn't have the cash for a fancy attorney, every penny was tied up in the ranch, and now I'd need thousands to replant, rebuild, and replace the cattle I'd lost. But giving in wasn't an option. Karen had crossed a line, and if I let her walk, she'd come for me again. I called my cousin Lila, a paralegal in Bozeman who knew her way around a courtroom. "Ethan," she said after I explained, "this woman's not just a nuisance. She's dangerous. We need to hit back hard, show the county who she really is." Lila came over that evening, her laptop loaded with research. She dug into Karen's history and found a trail of complaints and lawsuits stretching back a decade. "This is her playbook," Lila said, pointing to a stack of printouts. "She moves somewhere new, picks a fight, and either gets a payout or burns everything down trying. We need to prove she's lying about you." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, back to the Karen flowers, their delicate petals now ash. My dad used to say those flowers were a reminder that beauty could survive anything, even drought or frost. I wondered if he'd still believe that now. The next week was a blur of depositions and damage control. Lila helped me file a countersuit, claiming emotional distress and property damage. The fire had cost me $50,000, maybe more, and the bank was breathing down my neck about missed loan payments. Meanwhile, Karen was out on bail, holed up in her house, posting rants on social media about corrupt small-town sheriffs and land-thieving ranchers. She even started a crowdfunding campaign, claiming she was the victim of a rural conspiracy. I'd have laughed if I wasn't so damn tired. Her posts were getting traction, those city folks who'd never set foot on a ranch were eating up her sob story, sending her money to fight injustice. It made my blood boil, but Lila told me to stay quiet. "Let her dig her own grave," she said. "People like her always do." But Karen wasn't done. One morning, I woke to find my mailbox smashed and a note taped to it, "You'll pay for this, Ethan." The handwriting was hers, sloppy, angry, unmistakable. I called Tom, who added it to the evidence pile, but I could tell he was worried. "She's unhinged," he said. "I'm posting a deputy to keep an eye on your place." That night, I barely slept, jumping at every creak of the house. I kept a shotgun by the door, not because I wanted to use it, but because I didn't trust Karen to stop at arson. The breaking point came at the town hall meeting a week later. The county had called it to discuss the fire, and the room was packed, ranchers, farmers, even a few reporters from the local paper. Karen showed up, her lawyer at her side, looking like she'd rehearsed her victim act in a mirror. She stood up, tears in her eyes, and spun a tale about how I'd bullied her, a helpless newcomer, into defending herself. "I only lit that fire to protect my property," she cried. The room went silent, and I felt every eye on me. My hands clenched into fists, but Lila grabbed my arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let her talk. And talk she did too much. Karen's story unraveled as she rambled, contradicting herself, claiming the flowers were toxic 1 minute and stolen the next. Then Tom stood up, holding a folder. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "we've got security footage from a neighbor's camera showing you pouring gasoline that night. Care to explain?" The crowd gasped. Karen's lawyer tried to object, but Tom kept going. "We've also got your phone records, showing you called the fire department after the blaze started, not before. You wanted Ethan's ranch to burn." The room erupted. People shouted, some at Karen, some at me, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Karen's face crumpled, her lawyer pulling her back to her seat. For the first time, she looked small, not like the fire-breathing dragon who'd tormented me for months. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was hollow. The ranch was still in ruins, my cattle were still gone, and no amount of justice would bring back what I'd lost. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the scorched pasture. The Karen flowers were gone, but a few stubborn stalks had survived, their white petals glowing under the moon. I thought about my dad, how he'd fought for this land through blizzards and bankruptcies. I thought about Karen, too, how her anger had consumed her, turned her into someone who'd rather burn everything than lose a fight. There was a lesson there, about pride and vengeance, but I was too tired to unpack it. All I knew was that the double bar was still mine, and I'd fight for it, just like those flowers fought to bloom. The weeks after the town hall meeting felt like wading through mud. The county pressed charges against Karen for arson and vandalism, and her lawyer's slick talk couldn't save her from the evidence piling up like hay bales. Security footage, phone records, and even her own crowd-funded rants painted a clear picture. She'd planned the fire, not as a desperate act, but as revenge. I should have felt relief, but every day brought new battles. The bank sent another notice about my overdue loans, and the scorched pasture was a constant reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. The Karen flowers, those stubborn survivors, were all that kept me grounded, proof that life could endure even the worst blows. Lila, my cousin, became my anchor. She worked late into the night, digging through legal documents and rallying neighbors to testify about Karen's antics. "We're not just fighting her," Lila said one evening, her eyes fierce over a stack of papers. "We're fighting for the ranch, for your dad's legacy." Her words hit hard. My dad had loved this land, not just for its beauty but for what it stood for: resilience, community, a life earned through sweat and grit. I couldn't let Karen's vendetta erase that. But the cost of fighting her was bleeding me dry. Legal fees, lost cattle, and repairs were pushing me toward a cliff. I started selling off equipment, even my dad's old truck, just to keep the lights on. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't backing down. From her house across the property line, she kept up her campaign, now targeting me online. She posted videos claiming the sheriff, me Uncle Tom, was corrupt, that the whole town was conspiring against her. A few out-of-state blogs picked up her story, painting her as a brave outsider battling a backwoods mafia. It was nonsense, but it stung. Some of my ranch hands, spooked by the drama, started looking for work elsewhere. I couldn't blame them. Karen's chaos was a black cloud over the double bar, and I was running out of ways to keep it at bay. Then came the court date. The county courthouse was packed, standing room only, with neighbors, reporters, and even a few curious tourists who'd heard about the Karen fire saga. I sat in the front row, my stomach knotted, as Lila whispered last-minute advice. Karen walked in, head high, her lawyer in a suit that probably cost more than my tractor. She avoided my gaze, but I could feel her resentment like a heatwave. The prosecutor laid out the case: the gasoline canister with Karen's fingerprints, the footage of her sneaking onto my land, the note on my mailbox. Her lawyer tried to spin it, claiming she was emotionally distressed by my harassment, but the judge wasn't buying it. When Tom took the stand, his voice steady as he described finding Karen at the scene, the courtroom buzzed. "She admitted to lighting the fire," he said. "Said it was to teach Ethan a lesson." The crowd murmured, and I saw Karen's shoulders slump. For the first time, she looked defeated, like the weight of her own actions had finally caught up. The judge sentenced her to 3 years for arson, plus restitution for the damage to my ranch. It sounded like justice, but the number $75,000 felt like a hollow victory. I didn't have the resources to rebuild, and Karen's crowdfunding wasn't going to cover it. As she was led away in cuffs, she turned to me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over, Ethan," she hissed. I didn't respond. I was too tired, and part of me wondered if she was right. Back at the ranch, reality set in. The restitution would take years to collect, if it ever came at all. The bank was circling, and I had to make a choice: sell the double bar or find a miracle. I spent nights pacing, staring at the Karen flowers that still clung to life in the unburned corners of the ranch. They were my dad's favorite, a symbol of hope he'd always believed in. But hope wasn't paying the bills. One evening, Hank, the fire chief, stopped by with a proposal. "The community's talking," he said, leaning against my porch rail. "We want to help. A fundraiser, barbecue, auction, whatever it takes. You're one of us, Ethan." I swallowed hard, pride warring with gratitude. I'd never been good at accepting help, but I nodded. "Let's do it." The fundraiser was held in the town square, under a sky so clear it felt like a gift. Neighbors brought pies, ranchers donated gear, and even the local band played for free. Kids ran around with jars, collecting donations, while old-timers swapped stories about my dad. Lila emceed, her voice cracking as she told the crowd about the double bar's history. "This isn't just Ethan's fight," she said. "It's ours." By the end of the night, we'd raised $30,000, not enough to fix everything, but enough to keep the bank at bay. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, like a Karen flower pushing through ash. But the story doesn't end with a tidy bow. A month later, I got a letter from Karen's lawyer. She was appealing her conviction, claiming new evidence and blurry photos she said proved I'd tampered with the fence line. It was a lie, but it meant more legal battles, more costs. I sat on my porch, the letter crumpled in my hand, and looked out at the ranch. The pasture was still scarred, the cattle still scattered, but those Karen flowers were spreading again, their white petals defiant against the blackened earth. I thought about my dad, about the fights he'd faced to keep this place alive. I thought about Karen, too, how her anger had consumed her, left her with nothing but a cell and a grudge. In the end, the double bar survived, but not without scars. I kept fighting, not just for the land but for what it meant, a life built on stubborn, hard-won hope. The community rallied, the flowers bloomed, and I found a strength I didn't know I had. But the cost was steep. Karen's vendetta had taken more than land. It had taken my trust, my peace, and a piece of my heart. As I watched the sun set over the ranch, I realized the bitter truth: some battles leave no winners, only survivors. And sometimes, surviving is enough.